Good evening. Farming has been about competitive breeding for years, growing the most disease-resistant, highest-yielding crop, or the biggest pig, the most productive milking cow, or a prime meat heifer. But in the past couple of decades, science has played an increasing role on the farm and in the production of the food we eat. Now, technology has introduced a new and sometimes uncomfortable word into our farm vocabulary: cloning. Cloned animals and their offspring are making their way from the lab to farms and ranches across the country. The next stop, your dinner table. The FDA has asked farmers who have clones to voluntarily withhold their meat and milk from the market. But that moratorium is just that, voluntary. It is quite possible you may already have poured a glass of milk from a cloned animal or cooked a Sunday roast of cloned meat without even knowing it. And if the latest assessment from the FDA stands, cloned food at the supermarket may soon become an everyday event.
It is a 21st century phenomenon. Food is labeled extensively, yet an ordinary trip to the market does little to connect the consumer to the farm.
Most of us are now living in an urban environment, and we don't really have a clue as to where our food comes from or how it's managed.
As the Director of Nutrition for the American Council on Science and Health, Dr. Ruth Kava studies food and the science behind it.
There are many food technologies like in vitro fertilization, artificial insemination. They've been used for years in food production, but most people aren't aware of that.
Nor are most aware that cloning is next. But what exactly is a cloned animal? Simply put, it's removing the DNA from an egg, effectively emptying it out, inserting living cells, or DNA, from the animal to be cloned into the empty egg, stimulating it, putting it in an incubator to grow, then implanting the embryo into a surrogate mother. When the baby is born, it will have the same genetic makeup, the same DNA as the original donor. While many consumers remain basically ignorant of breeding techniques, there is heightened awareness about food safety. Consider organic food sales up 285% within the last 10 years. Now, in a move that is solidifying consumer outcry, the Food and Drug Administration is about to bless cloning, the latest addition to animal husbandry. The FDA declined repeated requests for an interview with us, but according to the FDA's report, milk and meat from cloned cows, pigs, goats, and their offspring are, quote, as safe as food we eat every day. And cloning poses no unique risks to animal health when compared to other assisted reproductive technologies currently in use in U.S. agriculture.
When we say, hello, Dolly, you've been approved for our food supply. Hello, Dolly. Welcome to the world of the Dolly Burger.
No one involved in cloning is suggesting the Dolly Burger will soon be available. In fact, sheep weren't conclusively addressed in the FDA's report. But if the FDA's report stands, and it well may, meat and milk from cloned animals or their offspring may be offered in the local market in a few weeks. And according to the FDA, you won't be able to tell the difference. For that, Senator Barbara Mikulski would like shoppers to be prepared.
I have legislation pending in the United States Senate that says you have to label cloned food as it enters into the American food supply. Food that's either the cloned animal or its progeny. You have to tell about it at the wholesale level, at the retail level, or at the restaurant level.
As you know, farmers have promised voluntarily they will not put cloned food into the food system. Do you think that works?
Well, I think not ultimately, because I think if there's any money in it, where there's greed, there's scam and scandal.
You think people are being honorable about this, or do you think anybody's sticking they're sliding in a little meat or dairy products into the food supply?
Ben & Jerry's ice cream co-founder, Jerry Greenfield.
You know, I guess I'm surprised to hear that it's a voluntary ban. I just assumed that it was something that didn't happen yet, and that we were safe. But a voluntary ban. It's the honor system. So food producers are just expected to follow their hearts about what's right and what they've agreed to do.
Greenfield has been in the forefront of compassionate animal practices and farm stewardship.
Whenever you mention this idea of meat or dairy products from cloned animals to anybody walking down the street, their first reaction is, ooh, what a weird idea is that? I mean, it ranges from people being mildly disturbed to just being repulsed. But I have never run into anybody who starts jumping up and down and saying, wow, what a great thing, we can start eating meat and dairy products from cloned animals.
Milk cows, not clones. I want real milk in my ice cream cone.
His heart recently led him to Washington, where his co-workers donned cow suits to raise awareness about cloning, hoping to forestall its official entry into the market, at least until further study is complete.
I think people in general are all for technological breakthroughs and scientific breakthroughs. It's obviously the way a lot of progress is made, but simply because we're able to do something like cloning animals doesn't mean we should be doing it. It doesn't mean that it's safe. It doesn't mean that it's healthy. It doesn't mean that it's beneficial. It doesn't even mean that it's desirable.
Meat and milk both need to be studied much more closely because these products from cloned animals just aren't proven to be safe yet and shouldn't be on the market.
Joe Mendelson is the co-founder and legal director of the Center for Food Safety. Hoping to forestall an FDA decision, the center recently released this video on YouTube in protest of cloned food entering our food supply.
The FDA has studied this for 6 years. The FDA has concluded, not just a guess, not just a maybe, the FDA has concluded it's safe. And as you know, they're about to come out and make that official. And to that you say what?
We think the FDA study is actually very incomplete. The FDA itself admits that over 90% of the attempts to create cloned animals lead to problems. So it is only looking at the 10% of the animals it says could ever end up in the food supply. It doesn't look at long-term studies. We know that the effects on what appear to be healthy clones can come up many years later. And we don't know what that really means for an animal. The National Academy of Sciences itself has said there really is not a methodology to prove whether these animals are safe or not to produce milk and meat. And we think the FDA is jumping the gun, and we think it's an incomplete assessment.
The majority of consumer sentiment seems to mirror the Center for Food Safety's opinion. A Pew Foundation initiative on food and biotechnology in 2006 found that 64% of consumers are uncomfortable with animal cloning.
I think consumers are concerned about any new technology, number one. Number two, their awareness of cloning is very, very low. So if you were asked about a new technology and you know nothing about it, you probably would have a yuck reaction to that technology. I think I would too.
According to Dr. Barb Glenn at the Maryland-based Biotechnology Industry Organization, the apprehension is misplaced.
And livestock cloning is one of the best tools we have, new tools in the toolbox to improve the quality and the reliability and the consistency of meat and milk.
Now, how has the process changed since the first days of Dolly, the now world-famous sheep that was cloned?
Dolly was the very first mammal that was produced through this technology called somatic cell nuclear transfer. So very importantly, we were able to take an adult cell and offer it forward to become a new baby calf or a new baby pig. What we've done with this technology in the last few years is dramatically improve our ability to increase the success rates.
What's the downside, or is there a downside to cloning?
Well, there isn't a downside to this new technology. This is cloning. It's an assisted reproductive technology. It gives farmers and ranchers the choice to produce healthier, better animals. And what farmer doesn't want to do that?
This is where a farmer might take a prize bull or cow to be cloned. We're here at Biogen, a company in the forefront of animal genetics. Biogen has been cloning animals for several years, and just last September, the company created an exact genetic copy of a champion barrel racing horse. Here, scientists can identify DNA, create clones, and even store animals' genes in cryogenics for later cloning. This is also one of 2 laboratories that provided essential data for the FDA's risk assessment to help determine whether cloned food should or should not enter our food supply.
At Viagen, the cost for a clone is about $16,000. The process begins in a lab with cryogenically stored material under the care of Dr. Irina Polojaiva, Vice President and Chief Science Officer for Viagen.
What we have here is our gene bank storage. So we keep frozen samples, and those are skin samples in liquid nitrogen. We can keep these cells stored indefinitely.
So what's the temperature in there?
It's minus 196 degrees Celsius.
Dr. Polojaiva's group provided information included in the FDA's draft risk assessment about the animals which were cloned by Viagen.
First, we remove genetic material from an egg, and it's what exactly you can see on the screen at the moment.
In Viagen's laboratory, Dr. Polojaiva had her technicians perform a somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT, cloning for us.
We can visualize DNA, which is bright blue staining there. For that purpose, we use DNA-specific dye. And in a second, you will see the process of enucleation. So DNA material now is removed. And then the next step of the process will be replacing DNA from an egg with DNA from skin cell. After that, we activate these embryos, and activation process is simply a process which mimics fertilization process.
Are you prepared to say that the science as it deals with cloning is perfect at the moment?
Science is not an absolute. You never say never in science, mostly because we're continuing to improve our understanding of it as we move along. Cloning is no different.
It's both the imperfect science and the ethical questions that sent Ben & Jerry's co-founder Jerry Greenfield to Washington.
Who really gets to create life? Who gets to fool around and change life? And is it something that is part of the sacred world that should be beyond the handiwork of man? And I think that's something that people need to decide, as opposed to just saying, well, scientifically, we're capable of doing it, so let's go ahead and do it.
Artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization, and now cloning. Among some cattle ranchers and dairy herd operators, the buying and selling of embryos from prize bulls and cows is big business.
She was born on March 1st. She's a Jersey heifer.
This calf is just 1 day old. She is the result of cloning technology, courtesy of Pennsylvania-based Sciagra. As marketing director Steve Moore explains, her owners wanted an exact copy of her mother.
She was reproduced basically because her mother was a tremendous show cow. She was also a really good brood cow and was getting a lot of popularity within the Jersey breed at the time that they lost her. So therefore they wanted to have a genetic copy to continue on the genetic line and to put more genetics back into their herd from this particular bloodline.
This cloned calf's role in life is no different than any other breeding cow.
She'll be used for breeding, showing probably, but mostly her main goal in life is going to be to make babies.
Since 2001, Sciagra has successfully produced over 250 cloned animals as one of the few companies working with this technology in the U.S.
Lots of people say that it's got a really good flavor.
Sciagra contributed 11 cloned cows to the FDA study. Since cloned meat is not yet approved for public consumption, there was an 8,000-pound surplus of meat left over after the study ended. Employees here are so confident the meat is safe, they've been grilling it regularly.
I am cooking today Sciagra cloned hamburgers. We eat these almost once a week, either hamburgers or steaks prepared on the grill. We've been eating them for the last year and a half.
This is Genesis Z. She's 6 years old, and she's a clone animal.
Not long before the FDA study began, Maryland dairy farmer Greg Wiles started working with Sciagra in a clinical trial involving his prize cow, Zeta.
We were informed by the USDA and the Hosting Association that she was one of the top producing cows in the country.
If there was ever a cow to be cloned, it was Wiles' prize cow, Zeta, winning several trophies for her milk production and becoming the #1 cow in the country. Zeta was an international star, and highly in demand.
Basically, it opened up doors to all over the country and all over the world.
Wiles had hit the bovine jackpot. But as Zeta grew older and was unable to produce more calves, Wiles began to explore cloning to create an exact copy of his golden cow.
We felt that the money we were making off the original cow that we had here on the farm, we could, by cloning her and making an exact carbon copy of her, that we'd be able to pick up right where she left off in her life. We'd be able to continue to sell offspring from that animal all over the world.
Greg Wiles' clones were produced on a trial field study that we did back in 2000. It was prior to the FDA issue. It was prior to us even commercializing cloning.
In 2000, Sciagra developed the cloned embryos, and in 2001, the cloned animals were born.
We named the one after the animal division, Sciagra, and the other one, Genesis, which is based in the Bible of creation.
Genesis Z was healthy, but Sciagra Z never seemed quite right.
Roughly around 3 years of age, Sciagra Z had her second offspring, and she developed chronic diarrhea, lost like 500 pounds of body weight within a 2-week period. I had a local veterinarian come in and check her out. We couldn't find anything physically wrong with her. But at that point, she was half the size of the original Zeta cow. It just seemed to us that she had stopped growing at a year of age.
Wiles said he successfully bred Genesis Z several times. Fact is, she recently gave birth to her 6th calf. But Wiles says Sciagra Z experienced health problems throughout her short life. She died prematurely without ever having a healthy calf.
Most clones die early in development, very early. And those clones which survive to birth often die perinatally, just around birth. And then, of course, there are some animals which live longer, like Dolly. But when you look carefully at these animals, often they are not normal. They have defects.
Dr. Rudolf Janisch is a pioneer in transgenic science and a leader in the field of cloning. He is also a founding member of the Whitehead Institute at MIT in Boston.
One has to realize, of course, that clones are often not normal. And they suffer what we call of some epigenetic, it's called epigenetic abnormalities, which often make these clones to live much shorter than normal animals and have some ailments which really interferes with long life. Dolly is a good example. Dolly was very sick at 6 years of age, and that's much earlier than a normal sheep would. She had to be killed at 6 years of age.
Much younger than her more conventionally bred contemporaries, who live an average 10 to 12 years. The safety of cloned sheep was not addressed by the FDA, nor was the high failure rate of clones. Officials considered only animals that survived. Sciagra's Steve Moore says the success rate of producing a healthy cloned calf with his company is only about 15%.
We base our statistics looking at the number of embryos that we transfer that result into a live healthy calf, and that roughly is around 14 to 15%.
Opponents call the failure rate a red flag, but the bio-trade group's Dr. Glenn believes to focus only on surviving cloned animals is completely appropriate.
The epigenetic reprogramming is actually considered to be the point where if there's a change or an abnormality, that would be where it happens, right at the very beginning cell stage. And the US FDA concluded that looking at the cellular level really isn't the appropriate phase for understanding how this technology bears out in the animal as it reaches maturity or reaches commerce, meat and milk.
Which brings us to market, where cattle moves quickly and ranchers are on the honor system about how their cows are bred and whether or not they're cloned.
How would you say most of these cattle are bred? Is they bred artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization?
No, I'd say probably 95 to 98% of the cattle you see in this sale will be naturally bred.
Right.
The Milano Livestock Exchange is located about 70 miles outside of Austin, Texas, and is a family-run business. It's a typical venue for local cattle ranchers buying and selling animals.
This moves along pretty quickly.
It does, yeah.
There are dozens just like it throughout the country, bringing the beef you eat to market. Co-owner Stephen Lastovica is the man with the black cowboy hat in the middle of the action. He sets the price for the cattle coming into the ring, and the bidding begins.
Well, how has the cattle business been? Has it been pretty good?
It's been very good.
About average? Not so good.
It's been very good. It's been very above average.
Ronnie Lastovica runs the business office.
Bring me up to date on the cattle business. Are most of them bred by artificial insemination, in vitro fertilization?
Most of the animals that you'll see today are probably naturally bred.
On the day we were there, over 700 bulls, cows, and calves passed through their doors. Just last year, the Milano Livestock Exchange moved over 52,000 head.
Now these cattle come as are. They don't come with any bill of health or family history, so to speak.
Well, we've got a little family history on them. We know how they're bred. They're bred to low birth weight Angus bulls. So we've got, that's probably as deep information that we've got.
Though the Lastovicas know the parentage and the process of these cattle, the current standard for selling them at auction deals only with health on arrival. Unless a rancher offers the information, there is currently no testing that determines how an animal is conceived, cloned or otherwise. These cattle are sold to ranchers for breeding or to buyers such as Wayne Gibson.
How long you been dealing with cattle?
Oh goodness, all my life.
After Gibson buys the cattle here, they're put on a truck and driven to a plant where they'll be slaughtered.
Well, do you ever buy any cloned cattle that you know of?
Cloned cattle? No.
What are you looking for today?
These cattle are going to San Antonio to a packer who bones everything and makes boneless meat out of everything. L&H Packing Company is who I'm working for. They have a company called Shirlene that cooks that boneless meat. And then trades it to people like Taco Bell and Pepe Taco and such.
Right. So if I eat at Taco Bell down the line, I might be eating one of these?
Good chance you'd be eating one of these cows or bulls, yeah.
As far as anyone knows, even struggling farmers such as Greg Wiles seem to be honoring the voluntary request by the FDA to withhold cloned animals from the market. In the meantime, despite the competitive nature of the industry, not every rancher we met is quick to adopt this new breeding method.
The best way I can improve the quality of the calves that I'm going to sell is to buy quality genetic bulls that will improve the genetics of the calves.
A few miles from the Livestock Exchange, Eugene and Elaine Bauman own a small ranch. Although they are familiar with all modern breeding techniques designed to help create an A1 prime beef steer, they still think it's too expensive.
We have a ranch next door to us that has registered Angus cattle and very good genetics, and they use the embryo transplant on theirs and so forth. There's a possibility I would have some embryo transplanted bulls or something like this.
In addition to being a rancher yourself, you run a household. As a personal opinion, would you buy cloned meat? Would you have any reluctance to buy it?
No, I don't think so.
Well, would you have any hesitancy of giving cloned meat or the milk from cloned cows to your children or your grandchildren?
I may have to think twice about that.
Well, that's an honest answer.
I would check into it, I believe, more thoroughly before.
And what would be your concern?
That it may harm them in some way.
Of course, there's currently no way to check into it more thoroughly. But when we come back, we'll discuss the closest a consumer can come to tracking the path from farm to market.
Cloning farm animals for food is at a crossroads, halted only by the industry's desire to get a blessing from the government. But the FDA is about to green light the introduction of cloned meat and milk to the market, saying there is no detectable difference between the cloned and conventionally bred products. And it's true, consumers and scientists would be hard-pressed to distinguish which hamburger came from a cloned cow once it hits the grill. But that doesn't mean a consumer is powerless to avoid these products.
Yeah, cloning is clearly an excluded method and not allowed in organics.
George Seaman is the founder and CEO of Organic Valley and Organic Prairie. It's one of the largest organic co-ops in the country, soon celebrating its 20th anniversary.
Organic is an old word, but the way we see it today is about food, and that's a USDA accredited system of how food is produced, the materials that are used, the production systems that are used, and then it is a verification of how it's produced.
Seaman says business began to really take off about 5 years ago when the Organic Foods Production Act of 1990 went into effect and introduced a transparent process for labeling.
Well, the USDA passed a federal law in 1990, and that finally got implemented in 2002 with a set of strict rules about organic production can be done, but it also has a set of rules about how it's accredited with verified by a third-party certifier with an annual inspection. And so it's a pretty tight system that ensures integrity to the consumer, because integrity is such a crucial part of what organics is.
Yeah, this is Randy Randolph. She's named after our town.
When Organic Valley farmers Brent and Regina Beidler are asked about the FDA's assessment of cloning, Brent Beidler points to a past federal decision that was later proven unwise.
One of those was in the case of the mad cow. The organic community didn't think that it was a good idea to feed animal products to animals, to ruminants. The FDA had in fact said that that was safe and there was no problem with that. But when we did find that later when the mad cow situation arose, that the only place which consumers could go to be assured that their meat wasn't from animals which were fed animal products was the organic market.
Oh, Bunty.
Clearly, cloning is counter to the beliefs of organic farmers, but even those on the conventional, traditional side of the business, such as buyer Wayne Gibson and auctioneer Ronnie Lastavica, are cautious.
When you go to the meat market, you feel strongly or not that it should say that it comes from clone.
Yeah, I think it should. I think it should. If for no other reason than to get the information out, whether it's better or not as good or the same. It's important. I want to know. I want to know everything that happens to a piece of meat that I'm going to cook and eat, cook for my family. I want to know. I want to know where it came from, and I want to know what it's been eating. So the fact that it might be cloned or not cloned is important to me.
How do you come out on that? Do you care whether it's meat is labeled and it comes from clone? Or?
I do. I think that, again, I echo what Wayne said. I think it's just as a consumer, I want to be able to know what I'm putting in, what I'm putting in my body. I want to know what history do we have about the product. So I don't know it's so much the known, it's the unknown that concerns me.
Senator Mikulski agrees consumers should have a choice.
I'm for consumer choice, setting up an environment where we can have science to evaluate it over a period of time and really hold the FDA accountable for keeping an eye on this stuff.
And addressing the unknown is exactly what some food producers and markets plan to do if the FDA opens the door for cloned foods. Whole Foods Wild Oats has said in a statement, Whole Foods Market does not intend to sell meat or milk from cloned animals. Dean Foods, one of the largest dairy providers, goes a step further and has said, we will work with our dairy farmers to implement protocols to ensure that the milk they supply to Dean Foods does not come from cloned cows. For those that want to offer cloned food, Ben & Jerry's Jerry Greenfield says, label it.
I think that is the key, labeling things accordingly. Then people can make informed choices. Just don't sneak it in there. Don't take the public as fools.
And don't leave the long-term impact of cloned food to chance, says Senator Barbara Mikulski.
I believe in science. I believe in research. I'm a strong advocate of stem cell research, but I believe that we have to follow a scientific program that is based on sound science, a transparent process, and the first thing is be aware, do no harm. And I think cloning and the cloning of animal products and also the selling of the cloned progeny without consumers knowing it is a very dangerous way to go.
Senator Mikulski is continuing to try and gain support for her bill to label cloned food. In the meantime, the FDA will continue to accept public comment about cloned food entering our entire food supply until April 2nd.